Welcome to Men Pursuing More. I'm your host, Roger Maupin. I believe every man has the potential to push past his limits and strive for something greater. Whether you're a former athlete who is looking for what's next, a professional pushing through the daily grind, or someone simply ready to break through life's toughest challenges, if you're ready to step into the pursuit of something more, your pursuit begins now. All right, welcome back to Men Pursuing More podcast. I'm your host, Roger Maupin. And today I'm excited to welcome Marc Ryan to the podcast. Marc, welcome.
Yeah, great to be here, Roger.
Well, let's give a little intro before we get into kind of your story. So Marc has lived a remarkable journey through athletics, leadership, higher education, service at the highest level of sports, from growing up in Rosemount, Minnesota. Can't wait to hear about that. Serving on the U.S. Olympic Committee and spending more than 3 decades at the University of Minnesota. So a story of kind of perseverance, purpose, and finishing well. Marc, it is an honor to have you on the podcast today.
Great to be here with you, Roger. Looking forward to it.
Let's get in. Let's just dive into a couple of quick sports questions real quick. So your favorite all-time sports memory?
Wow.
I know there's a lot.
Good question. There's a lot. If I had to pick one, it would probably be in 1997. I'm going to give you two. 1997, Gopher men's basketball on the way to the Final Four in San Antonio. We played UCLA in the region final, with the winner going to the Final Four, which was in Indianapolis. And that was just a memorable day, a memorable time in history. I remember when we beat UCLA. Clem Haskins was our coach. I was actually writing his autobiography at the time, which came out later that fall. I knew we had a chance to have a special team, but didn't know, obviously, we'd be going to the Final Four and he'd be National Coach of the Year and everything. And I remember on the court afterwards hugging his wife, Clemette, his late wife. She just passed away. Great person. And we were celebrating. We were hugging. She goes, "Marc, we're going to sell a lot of books." And that's one. And then the second one would be in 1999. Glenn Mason was our football coach. We went to Happy Valley. We're playing Penn State, undefeated Penn State team, number 2 in the country. And we beat Penn State on last play of the game, a field goal, a freshman kicker named Dan Nystrom. I remember being there. There was a timeout. They were trying to freeze Dan. And I remember Dan, true freshman kicker, Minnesota kid, and him kneeling and praying, looking the other way in the other end zone. I thought, oh, please help us here. And Dan drilled it, and we upset the number 2 team in the country. We became bowl eligible for the first time in 13 years. Glenn Mason went on to become National Coach of the Year, and just really a monumental moment in Gopher football history. So those would be 2 out of many, Roger, that I'd probably select.
Shout out to the Minnesota Gophers. There you go. There's 2 of many.
Both were Gopher ones. There you go.
How about your all-time favorite sports team? Like growing up, I assume maybe it's the Vikings, maybe the Gophers, or maybe some other team.
Again, I'm cheating a little bit here because I'm going to give you 2. Obviously, number 1, first and foremost, is the Gophers, right? I worked there for 36 years, retired this past June, grew up as a Gopher fan. My brother, Bob, I'm one of 6 boys in our family. My brother, Bob, my third oldest brother, was a great athlete, and he was a scholarship football player, running back for the Gophers. So I went to games at Memorial Stadium 2 stadiums ago, where the Gophers played. And so it'd be the Gophers growing up along with the Rosemount Irish. When you're at that time, Rosemount was a very small town. Obviously, the south suburbs have grown immensely, as we both know. But when you're in a small town like that, your whole world is that town. And so the Rosemount Irish, those were my idols. I remember going to basketball games with my mom and dad, and Raleigh Schwans was my favorite player. And I think I was like 4 years old or 5 years old. And I always wanted to play for the Irish. That was the whole town. We used to ride our bikes down and watch the guys get on the bus for away games and watch the bus take off and then hustle back home so that when mom and dad came home from work, we could get in the car and get to the game. And back in those days, everybody went to the games, right? The whole town embraced it. Different era, different time, but those were very special moments watching the Rosemount Irish, especially my older brothers as I was growing up.
All right, we'll hear more about that too, about the Rosemount Irish. Love it.
Yeah.
All right, favorite all-time player in any sport, like one player you kind of idolize and just look up to as you were growing up. And
Yeah, without question, my brother Bob, who I mentioned, he was really fast. He was an all-state running back for the Irish, very good basketball player, and then all-state in track, 100-yard dash at the time. They weren't running 100 meters at that time. But he was, when you're a kid like that, he was a senior in high school and I was in 8th grade, and he seemed all world to me. Without a doubt, my brother Bob was my idol growing up in that small town of Rosemount.
all right, shout out to Bob
There you
Ryan.
go.
That's awesome. All right, let's get into your story. And you grew up in Rosemount, Minnesota, and the Ryan name carries deep history there. So share with the listeners. Some people know maybe a little bit about your story, but they may not know this part of the story about your grandparents, your family roots, and how that legacy shaped you growing up.
Yeah, I think people may or may not know why Rosemount, the mascot, is the Irish, right? And that was back in the day, was largely settled by Irish settlers who came over from Ireland. So my grandpa Mike, who I never met, he was passed away long before I was born. He came over, he was born in County Clare, and he came over from Ireland during the potato famine and settled along with many other Irish immigrants in Rosemount, and met my grandma Rose, and they got married. And my grandma Rose was a part of the very first graduating class out of Rosemount High School. And I think it was a class of 3, Roger. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe it was 1918. So that was the start of 4 generations of Ryans that graduated from Rosemount. My mom and dad were 1947 grads, high school sweethearts. Again, very small school, but my dad was the quarterback in football, played basketball, pitcher in baseball. Of course, girls back then didn't have the opportunities to play sports, so my mom was the cheerleader, and she was the homecoming queen, and they were the class of 47. And then I was one of 6 boys that all went through Rosemount, played sports for the Irish, and I've had 4 nieces that have also gone through Rosemount. So the community kind of runs in our blood. Our family business, I'm the only one of the 6 brothers that was not in the family business at one time or another. Gens Ryan, Plumbing and Heating. I love those guys. That's their tagline. If you've seen their commercials, and because they grew so much, they had to relocate, and they're now in Burnsville off of Highway 13. And my youngest brother, John, now runs the family business. But the community has meant a lot to us. We now live in Apple Valley, and our 3 kids went to Eastview High School and had a phenomenal experience there as well. This community, this area means a lot to our family. It's really our roots. And by and large, the Ryan family has not strayed very far from the South Metro.
Shout outs to Rosemount and the Irish and the Eastview Lightning.
There you go. Absolutely.
That's right. You're one of 6 boys. How was it growing up full of brothers, influence regards to like just resilience, perspective on life, competitiveness? Because I'm sure you're all pretty competitive. You all played sports.
Yeah, very competitive. Like I said, I was the youngest one. My brother John, like I mentioned, who runs the family business now, he was an oops. So I was the caboose for many years. And then, about 13 years, almost 13 years after me, John was born. But growing up, it was sports and the town and everything was so much a part of our lives. I don't know at what point, Roger, you realize, obviously you watch the news and sporting events, but I don't know at what point I realized there was a kind of a larger world beyond just Rosemount. Once a year, usually you go to West St. Paul for school shopping. That was a big deal, but everything was around this town. And just growing up, very competitive. All my brothers played sports. Going and watching them play was very influential on me. and wanting to compete and, like I say, ultimately compete for the Irish. Just a great experience. I drive by on the main drag there in Rosemount. It's a block up from First State Bank there on 145th, our old house. And I think, how did we get all of us in there? But God bless my mom. You were not late to the dinner table. And again, I'm not kidding, Roger. She'd go out the back door, and our back doors, we had a light, and it was a 3-car garage, and it was a basketball court, basically. But my mom, when dinner was ready, she'd come out and ring the bell and say, come and get it. And we ran from all over. And boy, you had to get to that dinner table because when it was gone. So if you wanted something to eat, and dinner didn't last too long, Roger. The food wasn't there very long with all boys. And so just a special upbringing. I'm so thankful to my mom and dad, and certainly love my brothers, and just had I would say, a very, very special upbringing.
Yeah, share with us your brothers and growing up at Rosemount, just about what you learned through the high school athletics, what you're involved in, and then why did you choose Morehead State?
Yeah, good question. I had tremendous teachers at Rosemount High School, right? And just incredibly influential, none more so than the coaches in the sports that I competed in. So when I think of Dick Labrie in cross country, and then Jim Howard in basketball, Jim Howard, we still get together with Coach Howard. I don't know if you've met him, Roger, or not, but
I've met him a few times, yeah.
He was ahead of his time and one of the very finest coaches I ever had in any sport. So me and some former teammates still get together with Coach Howard. He's doing really well. And things like film study and practice prep, and we had note cards, and every minute of every practice was dialed in. We didn't practice long, but we practiced efficiently. And just the impact he had on me, I don't think he ever got a technical, right? It was one thing to be a great coach, but just an incredible role model on top of that. That was in the days before nowadays, and it's just what it is. Every head coach in every level thinks they got to get up and be walking around. Yeah. And that's at every level. You didn't see that from him. And there's the one and only John Wooden, but I would almost compare him in that regard. Because if you watch the films, John Wooden's not standing up walking around very much. And just a real credit, just really proud to say he was our coach. And then Jim Sauer in track and field. He coached almost, I guess, all of my brothers as well. And of course, you saw that was back in the day when all the coaches were teachers in the school. So all the things that you learned and experienced at practice were reinforced the next day in the classroom and throughout the school days. I know that's different nowadays, just the way it is, but really influential. I always thought I would be a basketball player, right? And then towards the end of my high school career, I had some success in running. And my decision to go Morehead State was really twofold. One was because I got a scholarship to run track there, and I had an outstanding track program, and it was track and cross country program. The other was they had a Hall of Fame sports information director named Larry Scott, who's still a great friend and mentor to this day. And I got the opportunity to work as a student assistant, ultimately as an intern under him. When I was a senior in high school at Rosemount, it was a really good exercise and assignment was to write a paper, your autobiography, right? Talk about your family and some of the things that we've talked about here. And what are you going to do with your life? Okay. And I'm 17, Roger. Okay. I'm playing sports. I'm hanging out with my buddies. I'm coming home and mom's got dinner and my laundry done, and I got a girlfriend. I'm like, this isn't life. I started thinking, okay, what the heck are you going to do? And so I wrote a paper that said my career goal was to be the sports information director for the Gophers. And like I said, I had a brother that played there and was on the football team there. And after I wrote that paper, everything I did from a professional standpoint was geared towards making that dream and that goal come true. That was all factored into my opportunity and my decision to go to Morehead State, not just the athletic part and the academic part, but the opportunity to learn from one of the very best in the business, and Larry Scott.
Share with us more about that experience you had at Morehead State, because you ran track there, I know.
Yeah. Boy, it's incredible when you make a decision like that when you're 17, 18 years old, and the impact it has. You think it's just a 4 or 5 year decision, and it's really a lifetime decision, Roger. And our coach up there, Ron Maupin, former golfer, played on the Gopher football team back in the day, former Marine, former golfer. He was a teammate with Bud Grant and Jim Molosky, and the 1949 Gophers football team never won the national championship, but many say that might be the greatest Gopher team ever, but they didn't win the national championship. He admittedly was a third string center, Coach Maupin, but very proud of that experience nonetheless. Not only a great coach and champions, we won in cross country, indoor and outdoor track. I was a part of 10 conference championship teams there and had some success individually as well, but just met some of the greatest people and teammates are still some of my best friends to this day. I was up ice fishing last week on Lake of the Woods with college teammates that we haven't ran together for, what is it now, 40 some years, but we're still really tight and close. And Coach Maupin, Ron Maupin, brought that all together. He's in every Hall of Fame imaginable, and he's still alive. He's mid-90s now, Roger, and we still stay in contact with him, and just really blessed to have him in my life, along with Larry Scott, the SID, who I mentioned earlier. Still very close with him, and had him down. He was down for the Gophers Iowa men's basketball game here recently, and still stay in touch with him. So just really blessed. You think it's a 4 or 5 year decision, and here 40 plus years after I graduated from there, the connections with teammates and my coaches is as strong as ever.
And you think of how not just going to college, but what can sports bring players together, and they develop that kind of that family relationship, or that connection that you have for years to come. Because you might just go to 4-year college. I'm going to Morehead State. Hey, some friends and all that. But what sports can do for you, I played in college too, and just how it can build that bond, and not just that bond and that connection for during college, for years to come.
It's really true. You look at, I think, a high school. I grew up with two of my very best friends, Tony Olson and Ed McMenemy. We played sports all the way through up, and we're as tight as can be today yet, and always good friends, but it was galvanized by when you go through things together, the wins, the losses, the hard practices, it galvanizes you in your friendship. And then in college, Keith Haviland, who's a Farmington guy, competed against him going up. Keith Haviland and Todd Renner are two teammates that, like I said, I was up ice fishing, could see Canada from our ice house. We're up on Lake of the Woods. They're two great friends as well from college. Like I said, 40 plus years later, and those friendships and relationships are as strong as ever. And it all goes back to primarily sports and competing together and the things you experience. I can see that with my kids. Our son Sean has played at Eastview, and the buddies he has from those days, primarily through sports, school and sports. It's really neat to see that kind of come full circle. And I see my own 3 kids and their friends and their relationships that run really deep to this day. So it's neat to see.
Shout out to Tony O.
Tony O, man,
that's
one of
right.
the best. Yeah, he can still shoot the J, Roger.
You can, no doubt about that. After college, you worked at, Morehead State for about, you mentioned that earlier, then McAllister, and then later Villanova. So what were some of those learning experiences along the way, like leadership and service during those early years before you make your way to the Olympic Committee and then also Minnesota?
Yeah, so as I shared with you, my dream was to be the sports information director at the University of Minnesota. And they had a Hall of Fame sports information director, the late Bob Peterson there. So right out of college, I interviewed for an assistant in the Gopher Sports Information Office, which is the next step to being the director. And I was excited. I thought I would get it, and I didn't get it. And you see how fragile things are and sticking to your goals. I was devastated. And so I had a couple other interviews, and I went to you never know who you're going to run into. I had a Morehead State track shirt on. I went to buy some running shoes, right, in St. Paul. And the guy in the store was a track guy, and he noticed my shirt. And his wife, they're both really good friends to this day, the Damonts. She was the track coach at McAllister. And this was a store on Grand Avenue. I said, I think they're looking for us. I told him my story. I didn't get the job. And he said, go, I think here's where the office is. I think they're looking for a sports information director at McAllister. And it was a half-time position, Roger, 50%. It paid $6,600. And I went there, and I'm 23 years old. And so there's a attractive young girl who happened to be on the women's track team who was working in the HR office. She goes, that position's closed, but she said, bring your stuff tomorrow. Okay, and I'll see if I can get it in. I said, okay. And of course, there was no email or anything. You had to physically bring it back up. And so I brought my resume and all that kind of stuff, and then interviewed there. At the same time I interviewed to be, was at the newspaper in Red Wing, and got offered the job there, sports reporter and retail for Foot Locker. But I was trying to hold off to see if I got this McAllister job. And I hadn't heard. It's getting in August. College are starting to, school years beginning to start up again. And so I called McAllister and I talked to the receptionist. I said, Mark, sorry, we filled that job. And I thought, oh my God, my dream, it's done. I didn't really want to work in retail. I wasn't really excited about the sports reporting position. I'm like, what am I going to do? I remember laying back on my bed, and about 5 minutes later, the phone rang, and it was the same receptionist. She goes, I'm sorry, the position hasn't been filled. We'd offered it to another candidate, and if they don't accept it, you're our second choice. So what is it? Is it Jim Carrey or whatever? So you're saying I got a chance. And thankfully, for whatever reason, that individual turned it down. I became the sports information director at McAllister, and also became the head cross-country coach over time there, and then coached in track a little bit and made it a full-time job. I think it paid $12,000 as a full-time job. I was there for 2 years, and the assistant job at the Gophers opened up again, the one I didn't get the first time. The guy who was there got the head job at Indiana State. I thought, here's my chance again. And for a second time, I didn't get the job. They hired a former student athlete in that role as assistant sports information director. I thought, oh gosh. So it's like a lot of things, Roger, in life. If you keep doing what you're doing, and you expect the same results. So I said, I got to do something different here. So that's when I got involved with the U.S. Olympic Committee and volunteered and got selected and worked. They used to have Olympic festivals. I don't know if you remember those. Those were like on non-Olympic years, they had Olympic festivals. There was a very successful one here in the Twin Cities in 1990. And it was on ESPN. It was a big deal. I worked 3 of those, and then I worked with USA Basketball at the Goodwill Games, which no longer exist anymore. Ted Turner, TNT, created the Goodwill Games because the U.S. and Russians had boycotted back-to-back Olympics to try to get the Russians and U.S. to compete against each other. And I worked with USA Basketball. It was a loaded team. Coach Shifsky was the head coach, and Jim Boeheim was the assistant. And it just great experiences, and then got a chance to work the Olympic Games. They sold the U.S. Olympic Committee. Based on all those other opportunities, you went into a pool of candidates, and I got selected to work the Olympic Games in Barcelona. And when you asked about favorite sports memory, that's a hard one to beat, because we were on the first U.S. Olympic team playing into Barcelona. We were on the last one out. So we were there basically about a week before the opening ceremony and about 4 or 5 days after the closing ceremony. So almost a month. And just an incredible experience. With all of that, the job at Minnesota as the assistant came up again, a third time, right? Third time's the charm, Roger. The guy who got the job, the former athlete, he got his dream job, which was to work for the Chicago White Sox. He was a Chicago native. The job opened up a third time, and now and through the U.S. Olympic Committee, when I was doing all of those things, I got to work alongside the Villanova sports information director. Okay. So in the meantime, as I'm doing the Olympic stuff, I leave McAllister and become an assistant sports information director at Villanova at the heyday of the Big East Conference in basketball with Raleigh Massimino was our coach at Villanova, Boeheim at Syracuse, John Thompson at Georgetown, Louis Carnesecca at St. John's, gosh, on and on. I know I'm missing a lot of names, but, and so that third time the job at the Gophers came up again, my dream. I now had McAllister's experience. I worked at Villanova. I'd done all the U.S. Olympic Committee stuff. I'd done the U.S. or the Olympic Games. And so the third time I got the job and became an assistant sports information director for the Gophers in January of 1989. For some of your listeners out there, that's going to seem ancient. But, and then after 5 years there, 4 or 5 years, Bob Peterson, the Hall of Fame SID, retired. And then I achieved my dream to become the sports information director with the Gophers. Long story, but that's my path. Hopefully it's a path of resilience because I was this close to really not having a chance to chase my dream, hung in there, had multiple, I was devastated, like I said, each time I didn't get the job with the Gophers, but went back and had to essentially realize that what I was doing wasn't enough and I had to do something different. And then ultimately led to the opportunity on that third time to get the job and get in at the U, and then ultimately led to being the director.
Third time was a charm, and that was you. Now you've spending, I think, 36 years, and I know you just recently retired from the University of Minnesota. Now, I know you often speak about setting goals, chasing dreams, not giving up, and answering your why. How did those principles guide you in decisions throughout your career?
Yeah, my why, like it does for all of us, right? My why kind of changed, right? When I'm 17, 18 and say I want to be the sports information director for the Gophers, I didn't necessarily really know what that meant, other than I love sports and boy, it'd be great to be at games and events and whatnot. But much like you've done through your career, Roger, and the coaches and teachers that had an incredible impact on me, my why really became a college degree is life-changing. And a college degree, in this case from the University of Minnesota, prestigious school, is really life-changing. And I think that's really ultimately became my why is how do you change lives? 98% of the athletes won't go pro in sports, right? They'll go pro in something else. And it's really incredibly difficult to do that without that college degree. And so it's really powerful to be a part of that. Many student athletes that would never have an opportunity to go to college because they couldn't afford it, maybe they couldn't get into college, first generation college students out of their families have a chance to really change their life. Like I said, it's a life-changing experience. And nobody likes to win more than me. And I realize we're in the Big Ten and the responsibility to try to win. But I always say, even as a sport administrator, and I worked with several of our teams there as a sport administrator during my career, even if we win a national championship and that athlete does not graduate, that's a failure. That's a colossal failure. And really proud to say and excited to say is our graduation success rate was off the charts at Minnesota, much higher than the overall student body, in fact. And just, like I say, life-changing opportunities. I oversaw a program called the Gopher Graduation Program, Roger, and it's for whatever reason, student athletes that didn't graduate. And sometimes in sports, football, basketball, hockey, baseball, they maybe had a pro opportunity. How do you tell Logan Cooley, first round draft pick, NHL of Arizona, and now they're at Utah, after you're like the third overall pick, take the money, go play, chase that dream. We'll always be here for you. And I think during my time there, most, if not all of the former Gophers, just for example, that were in the NHL that still hadn't graduated through no fault of their own. They left early because there was big contracts on the table. Were taking a class here and a class there to try to graduate. Sometimes they're just knuckleheads and maybe didn't do what they're supposed to do. We welcomed them all. And it really answered my why, because even if they're all-star, all-world, or all-pro, fill in the blank, or whatever the sport calls it, in their sport, and an expert in their sport, they realized if they got out, once they retired, have a long life ahead of you still, they couldn't even coach their high school team, even if they were all-pro in their sport, if they didn't have a college degree. In most cases, that's my why. It's a life-changing opportunity. And like I say, I think winning and doing it with the right people and for the right reasons, they're not mutually exclusive. They go hand in hand, right? And even if someone's not really that interested, a student athlete in the college degree, and they just want to play their sport, if you go from one semester to the next and you're eligible and you take the things you need to do and you're there in summer school, a lot of our sports, at the end of the day, they're going to hand you a degree because you've done what you're supposed to do. And if that pro career never materializes, or you always tell our kids the NFL stands for not for long, right? I think the average NFL career is less than 3 years, right? Yeah. They'll always have that degree. So no matter what their motivation is, that was my why, life-changing, and in many cases, first person in their family to ever earn a degree. That's really powerful, Roger.
And it's interesting. I've had some former Gopher players on my podcast, and they go back to their experience at the University of Minnesota on the field or on the courts or just being a student athlete. And I think that would resonate with a lot of them about, hey, you're always a Gopher. Hey, someday come back and get your degree, whatever that time it might be.
It's one of the reasons why I never worked in pro sports, right? I'm a high school and college guy, because I think first and foremost, it's about education. Some people scoff at that, especially there's a lot going, a lot of changes in college athletics. But at the end of the day, it's still tethered to higher education. And I think that's the powerful part that makes it really special. I always say if at the University of Minnesota, if you're a field goal kicker, right, and you miss 3 field goals and we lose the game, after the game, put your arm around them, say, I love you, grab a sandwich on the way out, enjoy the time with your family, team meeting tomorrow, or make sure you get to class on Monday. He might not be kicking for you next week, but he's not kicked out the door. In the NFL, they're probably gone on Monday. I mean, it's different. And that's nothing against the NFL. It's just different. I think, like I say, I'm a high school college guy because it's tethered first and foremost to education. I think education is life-changing.
As we kind of wrap this up, what are some kind of final thoughts you want to leave with men pursuing more, but it can be others too, but for men as they continue their journey, it might be in the professional or just personally or both?
I always say, I know some people that whatever you do, make sure you find joy in it and that you make a difference in people's lives. And there's a lot of ways to do that. I know some people that go through life and when Monday comes, they can't wait till Friday, right? What a terrible way. Find something. I love the saying, do what you love and you'll love what you do, right? And we only got one shot at this, right? So try to make a difference in people around you and make an impact, because ultimately that's what it's all about. And like I say, you only got one shot. So do what you love what you do. I said that already. That's one of my favorite things.
All right, Marc, hey, thank you so much for your willingness to share your journey, your wisdom, and your heart today. I don't know if how much you're on social media, but where can people follow you, or at least, they're going to follow you on this podcast, but is there any other place they can go to find you if they have questions or they need some kind of advice, or maybe someone to mentor them, or how can they seek you out or find you?
I'm not much of a social media guy. Possibly, Roger, maybe you can put in the comments my contact information and people can reach out, and I'd be happy to work with and talk with anybody if they'd like to do that. So maybe that's the best way to go about it. But yeah, I try to do it. I try to emails and text, try to stay on top of all that, and not so much in the social media realm.
All right, that's a wrap with Marc Ryan. I want to thank you for being part of Men Pursuing More podcast.
All right. Thank you, Roger. I enjoyed it. Take care now.
Hey, thanks for listening to Men Pursuing More podcast. Don't forget to follow us at maupincoaching.com.